Episode 6. Ren and Stimpy's Happy Happy versus Joy Joy philosophy. How do people retain happiness despite hard times? This episode is dedicated to all people who not only regain their happiness, but also encourage others in their respective communities to rediscover the same after disasters. Some time ago, a good colleague asked me the title question regarding his hypothesis on how dealing with personal social issues may be keys to happiness of societies. He was also curious about this question with respect to COVID-19 related impacts to societies. Would people turn more towards inner fulfillment? Also, how did previous massive pandemics, tragedies, disasters affect people's outlook on life? Back in 1991, John Kricfalusi created the Ren and Stimpy Show, a Nickelodeon cartoon featuring a high-strung chihuahua and a cat with a blue nose. This cartoon, amongst other things, was famous for Happy Happy Joy Joy, but really didn't have any explanations on how to achieve happiness on a society scale. Getting back to my colleague's question. This is a tough question because happiness, per Oxford English Dictionary, is defined as the state of pleasurable contentment of mind, deep pleasure or contentment with one's circumstances. This is not the same as hedonism, defined as the belief that pleasure is the most important thing in life. Happiness, therefore, is a highly subjective term because what is happiness to an individual may not be the same for another or for society. Example, a New Yorker at a Boston Red Sox baseball game, brave, being happy for Johnny Damon hitting a home run for the New York Yankees. No more caveman. Pharrell Williams, in his 2013 Happy song, it's a song that has a lot of hypnotic acid jazz type of a feel to it. It's very similar to a Jamiroquai, a song called Rock Dust Light Star. It further confirms the subjectivity with Clap Along If You Know What Happiness Is To You lyric. The United States Navy submarine crews all have different forms of happiness they routinely steal from each other while the crew is underway. Happiness as a metric, from a definition point of view, therefore, is quite difficult to standardize across societies. The United Nations General Assembly's resolution called 65/309, Happiness, towards a holistic definition of development, which eventually yielded a series of World Happiness Reports, has something to offer. These reports use a combination of subjective and objective metrics in its Control Ladder survey, while relying on data from Gallup World Poll. Finland has ranked at number 1 in 2020 based on survey averages from 2017 to 2019, which is why 2022 report should be fascinating from a COVID-19 plus point of view. Although Finland, along with Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, has relatively high tax rates for distilled spirits, since Tallinn, Estonia, where many things are cheaper than in Finland, is only a few hours away from Helsinki by ferry, the Finns and maybe some Samis from northern Finland can just head over to Estonia to buy liquors for lower prices and just go back home without the risk of being charged with driving under the influence. Tragedies on a broad society scale often are a source of how people lose their happiness. This includes natural disasters such as diseases, waterborne-based destruction, i.e. floods and tsunamis, as well as human-induced disasters such as wars and nuclear fission-related events. I remember watching Monty Python's The Holy Grail movie in the late 1990s, barely able to understand the Queen's English. Thank you, Joshua Wade Roby from the House of Non Sequitur. This movie had a Bring Out Your Dead scene where the dead is told, don't be such a baby. During the scene, the dead person is essentially complaining from the dead people's cart about being dead. Granted, this movie took place a few centuries prior to the Black Death season, or the Black Death years, but if dead people truly were taken away in carts by droves, the Black Death times must have been quite overwhelming for societies as a whole. The Black Death, per Dave Roos's March 25th, 2020 article on History.com, was a bacterial outbreak that apparently had its origins in China, just like COVID-19. Yanni Beg, a Mongolian Khan, while attempting to invade the Crimean city of Kaffa in 1343, had so many of his army men infected with Black Death that his forces, what was remaining, ended up catapulting infected corpses into Kaffa. It's a grim example of biological warfare, and by the way, as for a European native version of this of the tools that are used to do stuff like this, look up mangonels, which eventually led to spreading the bacteria all around Europe and North Africa, effectively decimating their respective populations. Here's an interesting tidbit regarding a recorded instance of what has been happening, courtesy of politicians' responses to COVID-19. The Black Death in 1377 AD was addressed by the city of Ragusa, today known as Dubrovnik in Croatia, Hrvatska. Dubrovnik, it's... Look up the province or state called Damaria, and it'll make perfect sense. With social distancing and quarantine laws, which eventually led to restoration of order amongst overall sense of helplessness. The Black Death decimated European, North African, and parts of Chinese, thanks to Mongol rule, populations. And also the quarantine then was defined as 40 days. The number derived from Old Italian, modern for 14th century AD, word quarantino. Another reason why the Ragusa authorities used 40 days, it was based on the Bible's frequent use of this number. The first example being the 40 days and 40 nights in Genesis chapter 7, verse 4, or the first book of the Jewish Torah, or in German, is Eerste Buch van de Pentateuch. Also, thanks to Thomas H. Scheuermann, I recall learning about Rowan Atkinson's Blackadder character during World War I, back then referred to as the Great War. World War I was a massive conflict that exponentially grew out of proportion from Archduke Franz Ferdinand Karl Ludwig Joseph Maria von Österreich's assassination. As a result of pre-existing alliances/pacts, Germany ended up absorbing the financial brunt of the fallout per Treaty of Versailles. World War I decimated the European population and infrastructure to the point some cities did not fully recover, even to this day. For example, Mons, Belgium, during the early 1800s was a center of heavy industry thanks to coal mining. Yet the 1914 Battle of Mons was a sign of the city's economic decline to come. Unexploded ordnance from this time period, since not all artillery shells come with a warranty after all, is still discovered in various parts of Europe to this day. In fairness, the United States has this legacy as well. For example, in 2015, a mustard gas and phosgene round, dating back to World War I, was found near Lakehurst, New Jersey. So much for Garden State. I was introduced to BBC's Allo Allo sitcom about a French cafe owner who had to deal with a variety of challenges during World War II, courtesy of a Dutchman. Dank u wel, Piet. Although clearly fictional, after listening to the cast speak English with heavy accents per respective native languages, it's no wonder some prominent military leaders such as Hans van Look and Witten learned English to communicate with his British adversaries, eventually to become friends with John Howard, a British Army officer whom he actually fought against. World War II further decimated populations around the world and infrastructure to the point some cities were better off being completely built with new everything, rather than being restored back to respective historical designs. It's easy to see this when a good portion of Munich, Cologne, and Tokyo has post-1945 architecture, despite being quite old. Cologne's population was reduced to 10% of its pre-World War II numbers after 1944, and its infrastructure, to include TV media presence, is quite modern. It was far more destructive than World War I, despite Geneva Conventions banning weapons of mass destruction due to airplanes dropping bombs with extreme inaccuracy. After all, this was prior to GPS-enabled precision-guided munitions. Natural disasters, such as tsunamis, also impacted, as far as recorded history goes, destruction to Japan and Indonesia. On December 26th, which is technically Boxing Day for the Queen's colonies, in 2004, the Sumatra Andaman earthquake and subsequent tsunami led to deaths of about 227,898 people per U.S. Geological Survey, as well as irreversible destruction of ecosystems due to destruction of coral reefs, sewage leaks, and industrial chemical spills that contaminated the lands. The 2005 Kashmir earthquake in Pakistani-administered Azad Kashmir led to a death toll of 87,350 per 2005 Pakistan government report, yet it negatively affected more than 500,000 families, not to mention about 250,000 livestock killed to the collapse of stone-based barns. Families also had to find other shelters for remaining livestock since this disaster happened in wintertime. Sewage and chemical leaks are quite serious in a water-based disaster too. Here's one micro example. Back in 1995, the California city of Santa Barbara, with a population back then of less than 100,000 people, experienced severe flooding thanks to El Nino. Some people resorted to using jet skis on the flooded streets to go around. This was a major health hazard since the flooding led to sewage pipes being overfilled and raw sewage, think E. coli and other associated bacteria, obviously could contaminate the waters on the flooded streets where the jet skiers were just doing their thing. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, which led to the 2011 Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant meltdown, was initially a natural disaster that decreased Japan's gross domestic products index by 0.47%. Doesn't seem like that much, but it was so devastating that this actually led the Bank of Japan to offer 15 trillion yen to Japan's banking system in order to help normalize Japan's economy. For a bank to offer something like this, it was obvious that everybody was nervous about the economic fallouts. One remarkable thing about these disasters/tragedies is the commonality of community-led restoration/recovery efforts. Written records are rife with how both religious and secular entities, eventually organizations thanks to habits courtesy of nation-states, have either formed or adjusted to help people recover. 19th century examples include various member states of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, while 20th century examples include groups such as Médecins Sans Frontières or Doctors Without Borders and Mercy Ships. However, similar organizations lack restoring happiness as part of their mission statements, so if people regain their happiness, that outcome is, at best, incidental to organizational efforts to restore societies. Did these societies and people rediscover their happiness even after these tragedies? Aside from the UN's happiness report, as well as population and economic growth, which may not yield positive correlations to society's happiness depending on what societies you are looking at, since happiness is subjective to each individual, your mileage may vary in North American English vernacular. The happiness report doesn't reveal any causations between tragedies and happiness. One interesting article titled Happily Ever After in the March 2014 edition of Journal of Happiness Studies, a group of researchers, after interviewing over 400 women who were negatively impacted by 2005 Hurricane Katrina, deduced that women who were happy and had social support were likely to regain their happiness. However, the ones who didn't have social support were more likely to either remain unhappy or have lower levels of happiness, even after 4 years. This social support fits into the term social capital, well described in the book called Bowling Alone. Social capital, per Robert Putnam, the Harvard guy who wrote the book, is defined as features of social organizations such as networks, norms, and trust that facilitate action and cooperation for mutual benefit. So social support, in a sense, appears critical to having people get by with a little help from my friends when times are tough, and providing the inverse when applicable. I help you, and later on, if I need the help, hopefully you'll help me. Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone book actually highlights positive correlations between social capital, which includes both bridging and bonding social capitals, and people's well-being. He also explains how social capital has generally decreased starting in the mid-20th century, and there doesn't seem to be any positive trends in the United States. If he studied Finland with more similar methodologies and he found Finland to have more social capital, that may give one more metric with many undefined components for the World Happiness Report to consider in its Cantrell survey. So far, organizations don't seem to go after increasing individual happiness, and social capital can be good or bad, depending on outcomes. History texts and a good portion of Barnes & Noble in the United States have various records of notable people who have either regained or achieved high levels of happiness per their own definitions of what happiness is/was to them. Cornelia Arnolda Johanna ten Boom, also known as Corrie ten Boom, was a Dutch watchmaker. She was actually the first woman in Holland to be licensed to to work as a watchmaker in the Netherlands as of 1922. And also a writer, was famous for helping Jews escape the Nazis during World War II. She and her family were captured, tortured, and Corrie ten Boom, via clerical error, was released from Ravensbrück concentration camp in 1944. She then moved back to the Netherlands to help anyone in need, even Dutch people who collaborated with the Nazis. She clearly had many reasons to be hateful to the people who were cruel to her and her family. Yet she, as in many writings, has cited her faith in Jesus as a Calvinist Christian to serve society despite horrific tragedies. Louis Zamperini, an American Olympic athlete, I think he competed in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Also, a U.S. Army Air Forces officer, was also famous later in life as an evangelical Christian. During World War II, his airplane was shot down over the Pacific Ocean and was captured and he was captured and tortured by the Japanese, particularly by a torturer whose name was Mutsuhiro Watanabe, also known as the Bird. After many struggles after the war, even after being released and being sent back to America, he adopted Christianity. He was also inspired by Billy Graham, and spent the rest of his life meeting people who tortured him to forgive them, as well as helping out at-risk youth. The United States Air Force Academy's class of 2018 adopted him as their class exemplar. And for physical examples of this, if you can visit the U.S. Air Force Academy's Fairchild Hall, second level, south side of the building, go check it out. Both Corrie ten Boom and Louis Zamperini appear to achieve the Bible's definition of joy in their lives. The New Testament's book 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 8 indicates how joy is something people achieve irrespective of hard times. Joy, or kara in Old Greek, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, it's basically a note about how it's basically a definition which describes a feeling of inner gladness, delight, or rejoicing. Hans Ulrich Freiherr von Luck und Witten, colloquially referred to as Hans von Luck, was a tank officer in World War II Germany as part of the German 7th and 21st Panzer Divisions. He also wrote Panzer Commander, the book. This Prussian, born in Flensburg, where people today would say Moin as a greeting, studied under Erwin Rommel and became a formidable foe of the Allied forces, basically during World War II. Luke's battles, they basically covered spaces from France, North Africa, to eventually Berlin, where he was captured by the Soviets and was then a prisoner of war at a gulag camp in Georgia. Yes, that Georgia, the one with Tbilisi in it, not Atlanta. What was remarkable about him was his efforts to learn other people's languages, which included French, English, and thanks to the gulag, Russian. It was obvious he had little or to no hatred to the people he fought, as he fought on behalf of the Weimar Republic. After all, he was doing his duty as a good Prussian. After 4 years in the gulag, he was freed, and through several attempts to rebuild his life, even after losing his beloved Mercedes-Benz and also a woman named Dagmar. Yes, I read the book. He not only started a coffee import business, he kept touch with other German veterans he fought with. He started giving lectures at various war colleges regarding his experiences, notably, thanks to the British Military of Defense. He even became good friends with the people he fought against, as previously mentioned, the British Army Major John Howard. They fought over Pegasus Bridge in Normandy, by the way. He and John Howard annually met at a cafe near Pegasus Bridge in Normandy, France, although John Howard had to tell the owner that Hans von Luck was Swedish because the owner hated the Germans. What do these three people have in common? Corrie ten Boom and Louis Zamperini had Christianity, one version of monotheism from an academic point of view, which guided their actions as well as their outlooks on life. Hans von Luck had other veterans on both sides of World War II, nonetheless, he bonded with. In summary, these people had social capital, either via religious or through secular networks of people whom they shared common values with. So what does this mean for my good colleague's hypothesis regarding dealing with personal social issues being a key to society's happiness? Granted, this video is nowhere near exhaustive as Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone book, but it's worth reading, by the way. But one thing is clear. Grassroots-based efforts coupled with common values seems to be a good indicator of how far individual efforts in society may contribute to society's happiness. If an individual's source of happiness is based on helping others in need, having enough of these individuals, at least enough to be classified as social deviants per Bruce Schneier's Liars Are Not Like Liars book, it's a good book to read too, by the way. Helping others and being open to being helped is the way for social capital, both bridging and bonding capital types, to be properly reinvested in, for it to be noticed several decades after initial investment. But in order for individual efforts to be sustained, they should achieve joy per Greek definition or chara, either via religious or secular means. How do these points apply to people during COVID-19 times? As long as people do their best to build social capital, in-person interactions should be complemented by virtual means per Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone book. And keep tabs not just on people whom they share common values with, that by the way is called bonding social capital, but also go out of their way to reach out to people whom they don't have much in common with, which is defined as bridging capital. That should be a start. COVID-19 based restrictions have forced people to prioritize their routines. Your mileage may vary depending on what state in the United States you're in, with certain government-induced constraints and restraints. Even with economies destroyed by arbitrary rules, people have the opportunity to live with less money and more time for whatever their true priorities should be. Therefore, I'd say focus on others within your networks, the bonding social capital. Occasionally reach out to people outside your networks, the bridging social capital, and find something to personally hold on to during hard times. During COVID-19, why not wear a Darth Vader mask to Disneyland? I don't have him here, never mind. Okay, so why not wear a Darth Vader mask to Disneyland, assuming it may reopen one day in California? It meets all legal requirements, you make a fashion statement, and can encourage others in your networks to do the same for the sake of Star Wars solidarity. Alright, it's time for the Kevin Bacon game. Ronald Lee Ermey, famous for his Gunnery Sergeant Hartman role in Full Metal Jacket movie, was also famous for his 12-inch motivational figure, and it's "You're the person in charge of your own destiny," PG and below that version. Quote, Larry Elder, also known as Sage of South Central, is famous for "You have no control over the bad things that happen to you, but you're in 100% control of the effort you put into it." Philosophy. Gunny Ermey's motivational figure is only a purchase away, and Larry Elder's advice is free, thanks to YouTube. Happiness/joy study is for a PhD. Will probably take you a few years. So, for inspiration, think about so look up Lee Ermey and Larry Elder as being your personal happiness/joy coach, all for $50 or less. Thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, for the sake of social capital, any comments, any suggestions, please just post them, because honestly, these topics, they all come from all of you. They're not all from me, but these topics, they come from you, and I just happen to chew on them until kingdom come. Until next time.